Let's take a moment and close the outer eye so that the inner eye can open. And we see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light. And we watch this light as it begins to grow larger and larger until now it covers the entire inner vision of our mind. And we see for ourselves within this light a beautiful temple. And we see a garden that surrounds the temple and a body of water that flows through the garden. And we see that inside the temple, it's lit as well by this same beautiful golden light. And here we are, for we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of all that is holy and all that is true. And it is through that power which resides in us that we dedicate our time together and our experiences of one another. And we ask to be lifted above and beyond the limitations and fears that are the thought forms of this world, to the love and to the peace that lay beyond. And so it is, we say, Amen. I'd like to begin this afternoon by celebrating healing. We're in a season of human history that my spiritual friends refer to as the shaking before the sifting. In previous seasons, many of us who do the work of raising our consciousness and calling our communities to a place of healing, we could delegate our responsibilities to trusted institutions. For better or for worse, historically, we've been able to rely on something or someone to do the work for us. I'm celebrating the fact that even though most of these institutions that we've chosen to delegate our healing work to, while they've been unsuccessful in fulfilling these unreasonable expectations, many healers have found their voice to reclaim their space, roll up their sleeves, and spread love one heart at a time. Now, as much as I would like to stay in the vein of celebration, for the short duration of this talk, I found that this hands-on, one-on-one work is far more interesting. And so I'll share what healing looks like in my corner of the universe. First, I gotta tell you how I discovered wholeness. I found wholeness in disruption, through trauma. When my ordinary life got away from me, that's when I found wholeness. That's when I traded heartache for healing. So I thought I was going to meet with therapists, counselors, and support groups who embrace belief and help me continue to grow in my healing. But that's not what happened. I didn't realize it at first, but by looking back and remembering my recovery in slow motion, I finally discovered the disconnect. And here it is. These professionals were so steeped in the traditions and theories of Sigmund Freud that they had no place for belief. Even though I was somewhat familiar with Freudian theory and philosophy, I had no reason to give it much consideration. But when I found myself in desperate need of healing, all of a sudden, the shortcomings of Freudian thought and ideology became crazy important to me. Using the teachings of Carl Jung, on the other hand, and the application of Joseph Campbell and his book, The Hero's Journey, I quickly discovered that an applied belief system not only has an important role to play in my own healing, but also in any therapy designed to address disruption and repair brokenness. Now, most of my friends are Black men in the conservative American South. That's where I am now, Huntsville, Alabama. I was born and raised here, but moved away for work and recently moved back. Here, in this conservative American South, Black men are born into a traumatic system of institutional racism. This trauma hides in the souls of Black folk and reflects in every cultural expression. But our common experience with this year, 2020, has brought this dormant trauma to the surface. Now, Black men all over the South are either depressed, traumatized, unemployed, homeless, or even hopeless. The events of 2020 seem to come to break us, but not me. 2016 broke me. It was awful. I was in a bad place. I was at my rock bottom. It was the spring of that year that my father passed away on a Wednesday, and I had to bury my murdered best friend 3 days later. My body collapsed under the pressure. I was out for the count. But fortunately, a woman found me in the hospital. Her name was Linda. She was acquainted with the application of belief to heal the body. Linda helped me tap into my inner hero spirit. So even though my physical self was broken, my spiritual self became strong enough to pull redemption from my disruption. Linda helped me find my inner hero spirit. As a Black man of faith in the conservative American South, my reference point for success used to be the American businessman. I've heard it my whole life. Get educated, get experience, get your success. But my reference point for wholeness was never a rich white guy. The belief of my father and ancestors was way too strong for that. My wholeness was born from a story that took my family through wars and over oceans, from tented cotton fields into generational wealth. So as I lay in that ICU ward in the spring of 2016, it was critical that I come in contact with a social worker who was acquainted with belief as an important healing ingredient, if not intimately, casually, so that as she began to quote her favorite psalm to me, I began to believe a report that was in direct conflict with everything my doctors and nurses said about me and my prognosis. Now, advocating for other individuals who are managing chronic illness, I've come to learn that any trauma that we experience in life, directly or indirectly, remains dormant in our bodies until it is triggered by some kind of disruption. This disruption must then awaken all the trauma asleep in our bodies, just as the hero must awaken the dragon inside the castle. And from the hero stories, we know when that dragon is stirred, fear floods the castle with a tepid water containing decaying bodies of memories throughout our consciousness. There was a time when Freud was cutting edge in the field. And once you're trained one way in something, who's trying to go beyond it? But in 2020, we can no longer afford to stop with Freud. He doesn't go far enough. We need a methodology that goes deeper, because that's where our wounds are. We must go beyond the ego into the soul. We've got to leave the safety of the status quo and be willing to dive into the water after those we care for, who are in the midst of disruption in a state of chaos. That's where I was in 2016, and that's where almost all of my peers are now in 2020. Jordan Peterson describes disruption as chaos. From this description, we know that disruption is the event or sequence of events that kicks you far out of the status quo, out of safety, so that you can't predict from moment to moment or from day to day what's going to happen. Whether it's police brutality or hopelessness, in the middle of a racist government response to a global pandemic, the typical condition of existence for Black men in the American South is chaos. However, with Peterson's help, we discover a pattern for the hero that has been extrapolated from sacred scripture and projected into popular media. That's what we call the hero's journey. This journey takes the hero from order into chaos. and into a confrontation with the dragon for a fight to the death, into the resurrection of the body or identity, then back home with a prize of redemption. Using these lessons, we can tap into our own memory of health and wellness at the core of every belief system in the universe. In the article accompanying this talk, I'll explain this process in great detail. But for you this afternoon, I can go ahead and sum up these lessons in 4 points. First, from the hero, we learn that the one who is willing to confront chaos and evolve as disruption demands, he is also the one most likely to find wholeness, while the world around him remains in chaos. Second, from the journey, we learn that when traditional institutions and approaches fail, it is the belief-grounded individual who is likely to thrive. Third, from the disruption or dragon, we learn that confronting what terrifies us the most teaches us our greatest lessons. And finally, from the resurrection, we learn that when your world falls apart and you find yourself somewhere new, that new place is surrounded by opportunities that will bring you everything you need, not only to survive, but thrive. This journey belongs to the hero. We're all wired for fight or flight, but often in the face of disruption, we find ourselves in a third realm of fright. In our fear, we're paralyzed, frozen, totally reasonable for the Freudian advocate under the circumstances. However, using the space that Jung provides, the hero knows that as strong as the dragon is, he is no match for the force that empowers the hero from within. Although disruption disturbs our way of thinking, it gives us the opportunity to learn new strategies, or as neuroscience tells us, disruption creates neural pathways that illuminate strategies with broader perspectives for healthy living. Now, here's a sticking point. The great challenge for employing belief instead of pure Freudian psychoanalysis is this: belief is subjective. It belongs uniquely to the would-be hero. How then do you facilitate the use of a belief system that you don't share or even have access to? Such a great question. I'm going to reiterate it. If belief is subjective and belongs only to the would-be hero, how do you facilitate the use of a system that you do not have access to? The answer comes from Brené Brown, and I'm paraphrasing. She says, in order to empathize with someone else's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see their experience and not how you imagine it to be. Therefore, as we profess empathy as our great value, and the goal of our work with an individual is to help that individual find wholeness, then it doesn't matter what you, the healthcare worker, believes. It only matters what the individual believes. You don't need to accept as true or even plausible what the individual's belief is. You only need to encourage that individual to use what he or she believes and then help them apply that belief to their situation. Now, here is also where race and racism comes into play. For generations in our country, the medical profession has famously been unwilling to see Black people as people. When we meet with healthcare professionals, often our statements aren't seen as credible, our experiences are not seen as legitimate, and our pain is not seen as real. We're the guinea pigs of the nation. But this failure to see us not only hampers the health of the Black community, but it also affects the health of all communities. This concept has only recently been generally accepted by healthcare professionals in America. Part of the reason why our country has yet to develop a national response to the COVID crisis is that it was initially believed that COVID only affected Blacks and others who were not deemed to be politically valuable. But what we now know is that unless the entire body is healed, the whole body remains sick. Here again, if our methodology was broad enough to include belief, We could have learned this lesson generations ago, because in the realm of belief, of course the entire body is connected. Beyond basic survival and general body health, belief gives us new ways of looking at old problems, wherein lie every vaccine and cure to diseases yet discovered. Belief moves us from a reactive public health methodology to one that sees ahead and plans for unguessed crises, even before the disruptions emerge. As a healthcare worker and advocate myself, once I discovered my own healing and the genius in my wound, I sought out others who were seeking wholeness. In the process, I discovered the more I led others into healing, the more I understood the healing power within all of us, waiting to be activated. I call this understanding wound intelligence. The more we are willing to see others in this healthcare work as we see ourselves, the more understanding and wisdom we find, not only to help our peers, but also to help ourselves remain in a state of wholeness. I now accept that just as disruption awakens trauma, a proper response to disruption awakens healing. I believe, from my experience, first as a patient, then as a healthcare worker and an advocate, that regardless of who you are or where you're from, what you've done or what has happened to you, wholeness is a reality within your reach. But believing is a necessary part of the discovery process. My joy in discovery is encapsulated in this post I found on my timeline the other day. This is what it said. Sometimes you have to let go of the picture of what you thought life would be like and learn to find joy in the story you are actually living. I call this acceptance. America's institutional sins have blocked its healthy development and hampered its growth, so that the leaders of these institutions are largely blinded by their own selfish ambitions. Otherwise, we could have been using sacred texts this whole time, not for reasons of personal piety or even historical accuracy, but as a guide for the soul's existence on this darkened planet. For this reason, my foundational principle in the work of healthcare advocacy isn't love, it's social justice. I believe that wholeness comes as a prize for engaging relentlessly in the fight for justice. I always have. I just wasn't strong enough to instigate it because I was born into cultural brokenness. I was robbed of my wholeness before I was even a living soul. But accepting my healing and leading others into wholeness has awakened the hero inside me. Now I trust the hero's journey to lead me first into wars with unknown dragons, but then into unguessed possibilities of health and wellness. And here, in the year 2020, whether you believe me or not, we should be willing to try what we haven't considered in order to help people who are dealing with what we never conceived. For no man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Thank you.